The parable of the Good Samaritan. Who's ever heard that one before? Yeah? It's made its way into pretty much all society. We have a Good Samaritan law even, where if somebody's trying to help somebody else, they're not going to get in trouble for trying to help them. That's kind of something that happens. Being a Good Samaritan is something that we talk about often. And how many of us know Samaritans? Anybody know Samaritans? No, well, the Israelite people, the Jewish people that Jesus was talking to, they probably didn't know any Samaritans either. They wouldn't have any relationship with a Samaritan. That would be awful, okay? That would be out of bounds. You would never, as a good Jewish person who worshiped in Jerusalem, you would never be found dead next to a Samaritan. The Samaritans were in the northern part of Israel, and the Israelites, or they would call themselves like true Israelites, the leader of the law who was testing Jesus, he would have been from the south. He was probably somebody who would go to Jerusalem to worship God. The Samaritans would never. They were in the northern part, and this comes from a long line. In fact, they're part of the 12 tribes of Israel, so they're still Israelites. But there was a long time from the original time of the 12 tribes of Israel, the original promised land where they all were together, where they all had their own jobs. There were hundreds of years that moved from that space through to the time of Jesus. And in that time, the Babylonians had come and taken over, and there was different people that came in different places. And the southern part of Jerusalem, well, when they were taken off to Babylon, they married Babylonians, and they came back unclean, and they came back awful. There's just this whole long history of all of the awful things that they did, like marry somebody else who doesn't look like them. These are racial lines. Before race existed, they wouldn't understand what that word meant yet. That word and the way that we use it was invented later on. It was used to perpetuate slavery. But they understood that there was a difference between a Samaritan and who they were. They understood that they shouldn't like each other, that they wouldn't be caught dead next to each other, that they would never touch. Touch was an important part of society. Touching people and the ways that you went about that were much more, I don't want to say taboo, but they were much more scripted. You couldn't touch somebody who is bleeding, or else you would be unclean. Now, there's nothing wrong with somebody who's bleeding, but you just couldn't touch them, especially as somebody who was a priest. Or if you were a Levite, which would have been from one of the southern tribes, or southern one of the 12 tribes, one of the southern tribes, who was part of the priestly family. And the Levites were kind of, they were honored. They were the people of Levi. They were important people. So they would never touch somebody who was bleeding in a ditch. Or would they? Well, the lawyers, the ones who were making laws based on older laws, you see, what happened is that in the promised land, God gave the people tons of laws, very specific laws about how to live together. And what happened is that people who were trying to honor God would follow those laws. That is what righteousness meant, okay? And I put it like this because we don't use righteousness the same way. But at the time, righteous person, somebody who was right with God, who had a right relationship with God, who was an outstanding citizen, who was somebody who would be able to walk around and say that I am sinless or blameless, or that I am in the right with God because I follow the laws that were presented. Well, they still had lawyers. Have you noticed? And the lawyers were one who would interpret the law. And so they started adding things to the law, like the way that you should wash your hands after you do touch somebody in order to become clean. The rituals of cleanliness were all invented to try to follow the original laws. But they, sometimes they're not very clear, just like we have lawyers and judges today. Sometimes there's a law, and people will say, well, I think it's like this. And other people will say, well, I think it's like this. And so you have to keep interpreting it over and over and over. And these lawyers were outstanding at interpreting the law and making the law better for themselves and maybe not so good for other people. So this person who comes to Jesus to test Jesus, he gives Jesus the easiest question ever, I just want to say. This was not a very good lawyer, in my opinion. He says, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus says to him back, he answers a question with the question, which is classic Jesus. He says, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" And so he answered. Oh man, I can just imagine Jesus playing with this person. Like, he came to test me, and I give him the easiest question back, and he's already going to show that he knows everything, right? And so he says, "Love the Lord your God." Do you all know this? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your mind, and with all your soul. And in Luke and Matthew, they say things a little differently, but you guys all get what we're talking about, okay? Love the Lord your God with everything. In Luke's version, it's soul, strength, and mind. Well, heart, soul, strength, mind. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, love God with everything you have. And then also, what's the other part? Love your neighbor as yourself, right? It's kind of a little bit like the golden rule, right? Love people like you want to be, treat other people the way you want to be treated. So this is not a complex answer. This is not something that people didn't know. This is not something that was not understood. But lawyers, they like to pick things apart. They like to try to make things maybe a little bit more complicated or a little bit harder. And so then this is the test. This is the real test for Jesus. Who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? How many of us know the names of our neighbors? You don't have to raise your hand. How many of us know, I only know the neighbor on one side, and she doesn't like me very much, but I know her name. And the neighbors on the other side, we're still getting to know. But who is our neighbor? I'm going to ask you all. So this is the test that was given to Jesus. Who is my neighbor? So who's your neighbor?
Everybody who isn't you.
Everybody?
Who isn't you.
Everybody who isn't you. Okay. That's a lot of people. Yeah.
Everybody you meet.
Everybody you meet. Who is your neighbor? Love everyone. Love your neighbor as yourself. Ooh, that's hard to do, to love everyone you meet as much as you love yourself. Ooh, that would be an interesting thing to dig deeper, right? How do you do that? Then my next question is, well, how do you love? We're going to let that one be for now. But how do you love? I think that would have been a better question to Jesus. That would have been much harder. But the answer that Jesus gives is a wild answer. He starts talking about this person, this person who was robbed and he was beat. And we have the heading, the Good Samaritan, but that's not how the story was read. That's not how Jesus told the story. He waited like a joke for the punchline, okay? He started with, there was a man who was on the road and he was robbed and he was beaten up and he was laid in the side in a ditch. And then a priest came along. And the priest did nothing for the man. Well, the lawyers and the priests, they're pretty close, let me tell you. Because the priest would talk to the lawyers about the way that they should do ritual, and the lawyers would tell the priest what ritual looked like, and the law, what the law would say, or the way to interpret the law, the box that they drew, in order to perform the practices that would keep people close to God. Do you see how that works? They're right there with each other. The priests and the lawyers, they have to work together. That's how the system is set up. So he's talking to the lawyer and he says, the priest does nothing for the man. And then he says, well, then there's a Levite. And the Levite comes, and this is from the house of Levi. And they thought of themselves as better than other houses, okay? Partly because we all know, well, I know who Levi is, and I can't tell you all 12 tribes, okay? I know like 5 of them. Levi's one of them off the top of my head. And Levites were important people. They were close to the priestly class, in fact. And the Levite comes along, and what does he do for the man? Nothing. And then Jesus comes with the hard part for the lawyer. Then the Samaritan comes. Well, the Samaritan, in good terms, in good circumstances, would never be friends with the man who was laying in the ditch. He would never help him. In fact, there's a good reason that he would just walk by and he would look at him and he might even spit on him. You think, oh, that would be so harsh. But these are people who didn't like each other. And I'm not talking about a rivalry. I'm not talking about, I went to Duke, okay? Duke and UNC people, we didn't like each other, but we also didn't hate each other. We could still be friends. We could show up at places with 2 different shirts on and go like, good luck, your team stinks. You know what I mean? Like we would do that kind of thing. But we would never spit on them if they were laying in a ditch. But that's kind of the relationship that happens here. The people of Samaria, they were hated because they were people of Samaria. Hundreds of years of hatred built up walls between these people who were both trying to honor the same God, who then would have different lawyers and different priests and different places of worship and a different place where they would honor God. And the hero of the story, the neighbor, is the one who was from Samaria. He was the Samaritan. So then Jesus asked him at the end, after this exorbitant amount of care and love for this person, not only does he pick him up, not only does he bandage him and pour his wine and bandage his wounds and put him on his own donkey and carry him to an inn and go get hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars, multiple days' wages, part of your salary, what you would use to exist. He goes and gets so much money and gives it to the innkeeper and says, I want you to take care of him. And if you use all that money, the next time I come through here, I will pay you back anything that you could possibly need that you could have taken care of him for. As much money as you spent to get this man back in health, I will come back and do. Now there's being nice, and then there's this, right? This is beyond nice. This is maybe even over the top. And then the question goes back to the person, back to the lawyer. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? And guess what the lawyer doesn't say? He doesn't say Samaritan. He doesn't even want to say the name Samaritan. He hates Samaritans. In fact, there were now laws that kept people from being with Samaritans, which were not given in the original text. They were not given by God, but they were given by those who were interpreting the laws. So this man won't even admit in this fictitious story that Jesus has made up that a Samaritan could ever be his neighbor. Instead, he says, the one who showed mercy. Now, mercy is forgiveness when you have the right to punish someone. It's forgiveness when you have the right to punish someone. It's what grace looks like from God when things don't happen the way they should, and yet we are still loved. Mercy is that act of when you are supposed to not like somebody, when you are taught to not like somebody, when you are different than people, when you are taught and even given laws where you are taught to hate another group of people. And yet, the one who shows mercy is the one who has the right to hate someone and instead loves them. There is hope for our world. There are huge divides among people. And there are tons of people who want us to be divided. There are tons of people who want us to be divided. And yet there is hope. Because Jesus' mission, his movement, the way that God moves in the world is to show love, to show grace, to show mercy. And you are called to be grace and mercy in the world. There is hope. And it is not easy to do. It's simple to understand. It really is simple. You treat everyone the way that you want to be treated. You treat everyone the way that you want to be treated. So when somebody needs help, guess what? When you need help, you want help. When we need help with something, we want help, which means that when people want help with something, guess what we're supposed to do? We're supposed to help, because that's how it works. You treat them the way that you want to be treated. Sometimes people need help with things. Sometimes people are struggling with things. Sometimes people are down on their luck. Sometimes people have gone a path and chose their own way and done awful things and chose to be that awful. And they are at the bottom and they are finally saying, I need to change and I need help. And when somebody says, I need help, then the people of God have to show up to help. It's not a hard concept to understand. My 4-year-old understands it. But it is not easy to do. It takes time and effort and energy. It takes us breaking the ways that our culture works It takes stepping out and doing something new. It takes picking somebody up who was down and not just caring for them, but going over the top with them. How many of us have ever put somebody in a hotel and said, I'll pay for anything they need when I show up back here? It's not easy to do. And yet there is hope, because this is what God does in the world. This is what the love of God looks like. And we are the church. We are the people of God. We are the church. We are the people of God. And we have some wonderful, hard, difficult work to do to turn things around. And all God's people said, amen.